Warm welcome, everybody, to this panel discussion on hunger, conflict, and the prospects for peace in Mali, arranged by the World Food Programme and by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. My name is Sigrun Ravet, and I'm the Deputy Director at SIPRI. Hunger has been increasing in the world since 2014, and we also last year, for the first time, had a UN Security Conflict Resolution actually acknowledging the link between hunger and conflict. But this time, we really would like to zoom into the situation in Mali. As you know, since the military coup in 2012, Mali has really been shaken by conflict, violence, but it is also one of the most food insecure countries in the world. You have nearly 4 million people that do not have enough to eat, and you also have around 120,000 people that are internally displaced and in need of food assistance. And since last year, World Food Programme and SIPRI, we have a knowledge partnership where we, together with the World Food Programme, are trying to look into this very complex link between conflict and hunger, and to see whether the work that the World Food Programme is doing might contribute to more possibilities for peace, or whether there might be some few negative side effects that we then have to look into what one could do with that. And we started with 4 pilot studies, where Mali was one of them. But now I would like to introduce our fantastic panel. We will then have a discussion, and then I'll make sure to have some time for some question and answers also with you in the audience before we wrap up. First of all, I would like to introduce Silvia Caruso, who is the Country Director and World Food Programme's representative in Mali. She has been there for exactly 3 years, and she's worked with World Food Programmes in many senior positions. For example, she's been the Deputy Country Director in DRC, in Madagascar, and also in Mozambique. But she's also been a very strong force within the organization when taking the conflict sensitivity issues a step further. So we're looking forward to having you here.
Thank you.
Then Development Minister Peter Eriksson was supposed to be here today, but he unfortunately had to cancel. But we are very happy to have Janine Alm Eriksson, who is a Swedish Member of Parliament from the Green Party. She's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and she's also really been driving the international issues within the Green Party. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, this is my boss, Jan Eliasson, who is the chair of SIPRI Governing Board. He's also a former Deputy Secretary General and a former Swedish Foreign Minister. He's also worked extensively on mediation issues, for example, in Iraq and Darfur. And then last but not least, he is a real champion of Agenda 2030. But now I think it's time to actually kick off this discussion. And I, of course, want to start with turning to you, Silvia. You flew into Bamako, and it would be really interesting to get your view on the complex situation where you're working and where Mali is today. So please, take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sigrun. Thank you for organizing the 15 degrees that obviously, for people like me, feels like minus 15 degrees.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, I arrived in Mali exactly 3 years ago, 2nd of July 2016. So, 3 years after, when I am asked about giving a one line, my one line is, it's complicated. And it's very complicated. What we are witnessing at the moment, it's in fact a complex combination of factors. Governance, local governance, or meaning absence of the states in some areas, or weak governance, or reduced of public services, high demographic rates. That means a very young population, so almost half of the population is under 15. So that's quite significant. And climate change that is eroding the livelihoods of the rural population. And all of these factors combined together are creating tensions and fueling the conflict. So it's a vicious circle of fragility and conflict, a negative circle that has unfortunately made the situation worse in humanitarian terms. And in the last 6 months, I think we have witnessed a dramatic increase in violence in the center of the country. I have to say we made the headlines, Mali made the headlines for all the wrong reasons. In March there was a massacre of 160 people just in one village. And this meant that people are now running away from their villages in this region of the center, a little bit the neck of the country, a region that is highly populous, and that is also where the inner delta of Niger is. So a region also that bears enormous potentials for agriculture, very important for pastoralists. And this means that we are having great humanitarian needs, but at the same time, we should not just only focus on humanitarian, we should address the driver of the conflict through investing in those eroding livelihoods, and also, of course, together working to make those prospects of peace more tangible, and really setting the country on a different path. This is World Food Programme is, of course, a great outreach. For the last 3 years, we have touched over 1.5 million Malians through different programs. But the needs are increasing dramatically, and the response has been mainly focused on security, I had to say. A great deal of attention has been on security response, and when I talk security, it's hard security. Through the integrated missions, the DPKO, but also through own government budget, who has increased 4 times on security. But this meant it has decreased on social expenditure, which is a great concern, because instead the quest of the people, the call of the communities is more services, better services. So that's where I think I can probably stop, unless... Yeah.
No, thank you for that start, and there are many issues I'm sure we'll come back to. But I wanted to ask Janine. I mean, Sweden has a long-standing tradition of being a humanitarian donor, including to the World Food Programme, focusing also a lot on development issues. So, what would you say is Sweden's role in Mali?
Well, we see the very worrisome development too. And of course, there are so many different aspects that are working together for the worst situation. The security and the food, and a failure to meet the humanitarian needs now will, of course, worsen the conflict. And as we know, if people do not have food to feed their children, there's always a risk of, or people riot, and the conflict, of course, even expands. So we see that with our donorship to the World Food Programme and the work that you are doing is, of course, very crucial, and we have expanded that just now too. We see that we also have to strengthen the social contract, for example, and try in a very difficult environment to see that a more sustainable use of natural resources as one. That is difficult in the conflict right now, but we also see that when climate change is going to get worse, we will probably, unfortunately, have, if we don't come to that and see the connection between climate change and hunger and conflict, this will be even worse. So what we do in Mali now will, of course, help us to see how we can not make this situation come up in even more places. So we're very interested in this partnership, also looking at this relation that we are discussing here today. And I think it's very important because we have to, work both with the situation on the ground right now and stabilize the situation, but also in the longer term.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Now, when you've listened to many of those complex challenges, it would be interesting. What would you say are the links both to the Agenda 2030 that you were part of negotiating, but also looking at peace and development and probably also human rights at the same time in a very difficult environment?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that it is very good that you focus on this whole area of the Sahel. It is an area in the world which I think deserves much more attention, analysis, resources than it has today. I think we will pay a very heavy price if we don't deal with the situation in this area. It's not only Mali, it's Niger, it's Chad. I myself flew over Lake Chad. It was a childhood dream to fly over Lake Chad. I had seen it on the map, one of the biggest lakes in Africa, if not the biggest. In the 60s, it was a huge lake. When I flew over this 2.5 years ago, when I was Deputy Secretary General, it was 10% left. 10% of Lake Chad is there. And in this whole area, you have as both of you are hinting at and telling, there is a mixture of factors that will aggravate the situation further unless we have an effort that combines national efforts with international efforts. You have poverty, you have conflict, or even threatening war. I would say you have enormously dangerous terrorist groups subverting and working very close with some of the tribes. And there is also a basic political problem, I would say, in Mali, which is not solved. There is a peace agreement, but there are tensions that are historic, not least vis-à-vis the north. But now the problems are very much in the center, as I understand. And then you have this second thing I want to say is the causes of war. What are the causes of war? As you said, Sylvia, there is a number of reasons. You have climate change and poverty, and by that hunger. I have also personal experience with working with water. Water could either be a source of conflict, but it could, if we are smart, be a source of cooperation, if we do it right. You have, of course, tribal and other tensions, political tensions. You have interference from the outside. I worked a lot with the Syria war, and it is a poison in world politics today that we have what we call proxy wars. Other countries come in and play out their own tensions and interests inside one country. But I think the thing to focus on here is to focus on one aspect where we can do better and do more. And that is the issue of food security as a part of national security in a wider sense. SIPRI, our organization, Sigrun's and mine and Steph and others who are here, is known to be working with so-called hard security, military expenditures, nuclear weapons and so forth. But we are more and more realizing that security in today's world, Janine, as I know you subscribe to, so security is also human security, it is food security, it is environmental balance, it's a number of other factors that constitute security. I also make the case that human rights, acceptance of human rights is also security. When you have poverty, when you have lack of respect for human rights, you have pending or threatening conflicts. When I was President General Assembly 2005 and 2006, I was very proud to craft a sentence that I think summarizes it all. Kofi Annan and I received a huge document, 172 paragraphs. And Kofi Annan said, "Oh, you got to summarize this into a working summary, which gives us the agenda." So we devised a formula, which is the following, and this applies also to Mali. There is no peace without development. But there is no development without peace. And there is none of the above, I claimed at that time, without respect of human rights, well-functioning institutions, and rule of law. So you have three legs that have to be strong in order to have a strong society: peace, development, and institutions that function and human rights and rule of law. If one of these pillars is weak, the whole structure is weak. So our job today is to combine the efforts nationally to strengthen these three pillars, and for the international community to strengthen from the outside. And what we can do, and what SIPRI and World Food Programme are doing, with Mali as the area where we now focus on the field most intensely, is to see the relationship between hunger and conflict. It's there, but as we all understand, and you also should understand, there are many other factors. It will not be peace with only food. A number of other factors also have to play in. So thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I think I would like to follow up with you, Sylvia, because I mean, the World Food Programme has this dual mandate, both with the humanitarian angle, but also with development. And I mean, you work in all areas of Mali, even though it's under very difficult circumstances. And you often speak about that actually the food delivery can support, hopefully, peace. So could you tell us a little bit about what you call food security programming, supporting peace? What is that actually? I'm not sure everybody here will instinctively understand. What is that?
Yeah, let's try to unpack it into something practical. But let me just say that it has been my personal interest on these relations since various years, because what we see is that where we operate, food security and conflicts are in the same places. So inevitably, we have to ask ourselves, how to first operate in conflict areas, but also to what extent, we can do some good into those areas. And I think Mali is no exception. I mean, we saw those numbers you just mentioned, 4 million people. 20% of the population is food insecure every year, no matter what the agricultural output is. So what does mean food security programming, and what could be the pathways to help improve the prospect of peace? I think that was the compelling question, right? The one compelling question that we wanted to answer. And this is, I think, the real driving force behind the partnership with SIPRI. We needed a critical friends and with expertise as SIPRI to come in and give an objective look at what we are doing, if we are doing things in the right way. Where are the risks? Because there are risks also of operating food security programs in conflict area. And very summarized, I think 2 or 3 points came out of this research that have to be really mentioned. One is that to the extent that we see this conflict being fueled by scarcity of natural resources, the type of work that we do with those communities to help them re-green areas, better manage the water, to reclaim degraded land, will, of course, help to diffuse those tensions. But also the second part to this is the way we do those programs. We conceive them, we program. We do it through a very inclusive process, okay? In our jargon is community-based planning, livelihood, seasonal calendar. This is our language, but what in practice means is that we spend days with those communities, talking to the different groups, because of course women have different priorities, youth might have different priorities, those who live more on livestock, and have a very inclusive discussions in order to gather what is important and at what time of the year, in their views, for improving their well-being. And this process not only set the direction of the programs and the action, but it's a space for dialogue. It's a space for dialogue, and so it constitutes a platform, if well conceived, for going beyond just the issue of the programs into talking about what are the contentious problems of the community, why they're being pit one against the other. So this programming, this participatory planning has been also identified as a very strong entry point. And the third and the fourth, very quickly, there is a lot of theory out there that one of the, and I think Jens mentioned the state, the social contract, right? And there is a lot of theory out there that a government can deliver in an accountable manner and in a transparent manner will increase its credibility vis-à-vis his citizen. And the social contract is very much in jeopardy at the moment in some areas of Mali. So by supporting the decentralized authorities to deliver better their own services, we hope to be part of that process that make the government regaining trust and that social contract to be solidified or a bit repaired, I would say. And the fourth one, it's one very close to our heart. I believe World Food Programme has been supporting school meals for many, many years. At the moment, we know that in Sahel, in Mali, schools are being closed at a very, very concerning rate. Many people have been deprived of primary education, which is terrible because it obviously puts an hypothec on the future generation. And so school meals has also been found to be a powerful pathway because, first of all, it's a very inclusive objective. Communities always get together. They never question whether feeding their children at school, it's something that brings people together. It's something that brings community around the same objective. And the way to implement with voluntary workers, cooking the meals, is also, again, a space for dialogue beyond the specific, project itself. So this have been sort of 4 pathways that have been identified, which we recognize bear a lot of potentials. No, just maybe quickly, what does it mean? We have been going in some of these areas in the north of the central Mali, Koro, a very difficult area at the moment. There are villages that have the same name, and yet 2 villages, one inhabited by Dogon, the other inhabited by Fulani, under a lot of tension. And what it meant that they were not trading anymore among themselves, that the livestock of one of the villages could not pass through the other. And so I think this process that I just described has today brought a different dynamics, whereby we have agreed to build a well, and that well is serving livestock for one village and is also enabling these communities to tie up better relations, the market to revive, and the exchange to start again. Economic exchange.
No, thank you. And I think a lot of the things that we looked at in the study you already did, but it took it up to the surface, the need for conflict sensitivity and also working with the communities in a more apparent way.
Okay, yeah.
I'm thinking, Janine, you were already mentioning that actually when it comes to the drivers of hunger in the world, you have the conflicts, but you also have climate. But then we also mentioned the need, you also being a politician, the need to work with more sensitive issues when you are in a country like Mali when it comes to democracy and state building and so on. What is your experience, would you say, when thinking about those issues?
Well, we're circling around it all the time here, and Jan was talking about it too. We have to see between the severe needs on the ground right now, but we also have to have a longer perspective and see how we can do this also, because the situation has to evolve to a better place, to a more peaceful development. And so we have to see the humanitarian and the development and the peace processes together all the time. But Sweden has been very concerned all the time about hunger and conflict and how they are, the relationship between them, if I say. But also the importance of a longer perspective work has to be there all the time. And that's why we cannot just say more funding right now to this. We have to, see where the money can come in at the right place, at the right time, to do both things, both what is needed right now, but also capacity building for the future, to build stronger institutions, to build democracy, and to have a freer environment, to see that, because the human rights issues are also very, very important. So the work has to really be on the short and the long term all the time.
Thank you. Jan, when you look at the interventions in Mali from the international community, I would say that a lot has been focused on the so-called hard security. But as you mentioned, I mean, the work that SIPRI has done and others in Mali, when you speak to the population, when they talk about security, it's a lot about having food, education, and job opportunities. So how can we make sure to actually have all of this integrated agenda at the same time in such a difficult environment?
I think you have both covered the main point, that hunger is both a symptom and a cause of conflict. So we have to deal with the symptom in the short run, saving lives urgently, just horrific in certain parts of Mali and other parts of Africa also. But our job would be hopeless and forever ongoing, unless we also deal with the cause, as both of you say. So you have to have both a short-term perspective of saving lives, but we, the humanitarians, are the most convinced when it comes to dealing with causes, because we see the results when there is nothing done early on. So I think there are two things that I'm thinking of after my experience in the UN and the Swedish Foreign Service, is that there are two things we need to do better. One is to discover early signs and act early on. Far too often we are blind and we react only when you have the horrible pictures out there. There is a need for us to feel the vibrations. Do you hear the vibrations? We need to react when we hear the vibrations in the ground, not wait for the last catastrophic moment. The other thing is to learn the lesson that we can't do anything alone. We need to have a mobilization of national actors, political will inside the country, better functioning institutions, and a number of factors that the nations that are immediately affected have to do. And then the outside world needs to live up to the Sustainable Development Goals, Sigrun, that you worked personally with so much. There is a goal. There is an SDG 2. No, I switched brand. Now I have the SIPRI pin. For the moment. I have the SDG pin in my pocket. But there is both one on extreme poverty, of course, and the one second on hunger, and that's
on conflict.
That's an obligation. So to come back to the point that, to put it very simply, where there is war, there is practically always hunger. Look at Yemen today, it's just a horrific example of this. But also where there is hunger, there is a very grave risk that conflicts erupt. So this is the dilemma we have, to both deal with the short-term goal, but at the same time, I think from the political side, to push as hard as you can on dealing with the causes. If we are not dealing with the Sahel situation seriously, with this combination of hunger, conflict, terrorism, climate change, droughts, the Lake Chad, we will have, and we already have, but it's not enough noted, we will have migrants and refugees flowing in great numbers, often encouraged by trafficking, up to Libya, waiting to come into Europe, with all the consequences for you, from a human point of view, but also from a political point of view. And Angela Merkel, an unsung hero, even in development issues, she has visited this part of the world 8 times. Yeah. Why? Because she realizes that these countries have to be dealt with in a serious way, so that we just don't deal with the effects of things going wrong in the end. So that's why this example of Mali is an example of what we need to do, both from a sort of humanistic perspective, saving lives, but also in order to avoid another disaster, both inside the countries and for the region and for the world and for Europe. Could change the political map one more time in Europe as the flow of 2015. And therefore, I think it's good for us, SIPRI and the World Food Programme, to have an example of what we can do in the microcosm, a miniature. And if we can also show some results on the local level, it will be a contribution. I see you want to say something.
Yes, Sylvia,
I just want to say that speaks very much to what we've been also advocating. And I think it takes also the courage to understand that sequencing in an ideal world where we would have the perfect security and then, we move into the perfect development is just not at all, what the reality can, offers us. We need to have the courage to do these things at the same time in a collaborative way. Because they feed into each other.
Yeah.
So if we do not deliver to communities a minimum of hope and stabilize their livelihoods, we're not going to get the security and the stability. And so the other way around. So I just wanted to reinforce, but it often, this narrative, it's a bit, for Mali particularly, we feel it's very unbalanced, where a lot is, well, we have to fix the security, then we'll think about something else. And, we've been a little bit saying, well, it's not exactly like that. And as you say, this data of people being asked, what's your priority? All of them said food security. Actually, we were very surprised, but that was the survey the government itself did. So it was not anything that we can, as World Food Program, being told that we sort of played with the data. That was a national survey, so it was very, very telling, I believe.
No, and I also think that we also now have the facts that the humanitarian crises are much more longer and protracted. So, I mean, waiting for the gender issues or the climate issue or other issues, there is really no time. We have to do it at the same time. But I would like to invite the audience if there are some questions here. And please, if you want, state your name and maybe if you're from an organization. And I see one hand here on the first row. And then we have a lady in the back also. So please go ahead.
My name is Veronica Sellemark and I'm from Föreningen för utvecklingsfrågor, FUF. And I'm the project manager for sustainable peace and security. But last year I was actually based in Myanmar. And all of us know the tragic events that took place there and still are ongoing. And I was actually at a meeting with, there is a French organization, I don't remember the name of that also work with food for malnutrition children in Rakhine. And what happened there was that the government forced them to stop what they were doing. They forced them to stop feeding the starving children up in Rakhine state. I'm not an expert on Mali, but in Myanmar, the government is not really cooperating with the international community or the NGOs or such. But how is the situation in Mali? Has this also occurred there? Is this a common phenomenon in conflict-affected environments? Thanks.
I'll take a few questions before letting the panel. So secondly, we have the lady in blue there in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Minna Naukler, currently employed at Folke Bernadotte Academy, working on security sector reform in Mali. I just came back from Mali, where I was deployed to the civilian crisis management mission that the European Union is running in Bamako. I see one challenge and two great disconnects. I very much agree with what a lot of you have said, but I would be interested to hear your reactions to this. The first challenge that I see are all the different political interests. We talk about terrorism, migration, the geopolitical game, so to speak, which means that a lot of countries are not cooperating, but they're running their own agenda, and that they sometimes put before, I don't want to say, the common good, peace, development, etc. The other two disconnects that I see is one, our own, where we have great programs and great plans divided at headquarter level, which may all look very well on paper, but then when it comes to the actual implementation on the ground, it's very difficult because there is not necessarily this understanding about the complex processes and also how the institutions that we're supposed to work with, how they function. And I think that this could be highlighted more in this process. How do you translate this kind of strategy into practice? The second thing goes for the Malian partners, the structures that we are working with, because from what I've seen, there is a plenitude of activities at the operational, tactical level in terms of train and equip, development programs. I also think that there is a lot of political pressure at the top from the Security Council, et cetera, et cetera. But again, there's very little at this middle level to translate this kind of political pressure or what do I say, more kind of common strategies into real action. And this is what I am struggling with right now, security governance. How do we promote human security? Because this is basically what it is about. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a third question from somebody here? Somebody would like to add one. Okay, then we'll start with. We had a third one over there, or you can wait, and then we'll start with those and see.
No, go ahead, do it. With the third question. We better have it. You never know how much time we have.
Yeah, I'm a latecomer, so I don't know what you talk about. But, solar energy. I was working in Mali myself, so I know a lot of stuff there. But solar energy.
Could you stand up?
Could you stand up? Carl Wachtmeister, kör cykeltaxi. I was working in Mali with solar energy, and I wonder if there's things going on in solar energy area and also in water and reforestation and conflict resolution.
Okay.
Okay, so we have many interesting angles. I mean, both the risk of politicization from the government sides when it comes to the development, but also the disconnect sometimes from headquarters level to actual implementation in the field, and also maybe not taking into account enough all the political different vested interests that you will have in any conflict or in many countries. And then last but not least, more the angle with the climate, solar energy, and so on, what's happening in Mali. So who would like to have a first go here at trying to...
Janine, start.
Well, I don't have, of course, the expertise as those working on the ground and closer to the conflict, but it's... The issue of political interests and own agendas is, of course, not just a problem here, but in several of the conflicts that we see, and that is what also makes it difficult to get the solutions in place in a way that we would like to see. So that is, of course, something that we always have to work with, and I guess the Security Council has that on its table. Then I think the picture you gave is very interesting on how it is not working properly, and we are trying to give a flexible funding for the organizations and different parties working on the ground to actually use the funding in a very flexible way and see where it is needed to actually reach the goals. But I see that it's, of course, it's difficult also when it's a lot of organizations and many interests in there. But so the picture you give from it, it's very important for us to see too, because of course we always evaluate if we get back for the money. So, well, more about the situation.
Yes,
I wanted to answer the specific questions of whether, which, if I read it correctly, is the government a force against? Is it really putting obstacle? And I have to say that no, mostly it has been absent. But I think I've been in other countries where what you just described was the case. It has not been for Mali. I think its weakness and its inability rather than its opposition. And in fact, that has called more for us to support. We are seeing now, unfortunately, due to the famous emergency, which unfortunately we shouldn't have waited for the emergency to reach those levels, that the government is taking more proactive step to be out there to improve local governments, to improve the dialogue. So the short answer to your question is no. We are not seeing extreme example as the one you brought from Myanmar. Thank God for that. And actually, we are very pleased to see better example, more constructive now. So I'm glad to at least have this positive note. Sometimes and I don't know whether there was on the agenda on terrorism, migration. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, yes, from where I'm standing as World Program, yeah, we often feel, yeah, that the discussion has a higher objective, and that that there has to be more more attention to what is really happening on the ground, less about using the ghost of migration and terrorism in the wrong way. Of course, you have migration and terrorism, but it's probably by putting the communities at the center we're going to fix it, rather than bringing in more police and more arms and more armies. So we definitely try to rebalance that as much as we can, and advocating in the country for that to be, not turned around and, a little bit more equilibrated. You say that in English?
Absolutely.
Equilibrated
manner. So, Jan, what about the challenge to be at the top of the UN and making sure that it's delivered on the ground?
Well, since I'm no longer at the top of the UN and since I'm no longer foreign minister, I can be very open and honest on this issue. I have felt very, very many times deep frustration about lack of cooperation from the governments concerned. I have felt deep frustration about corruption and competing interests inside the nation, which has immobilized our efforts. I have felt enormous frustration about outside actors prolonging crisis, particularly in Syria, but now also Yemen and others. And I think this leads me to a more local perspective and to see things from the ground, from the grassroots perspective. Remember, this charter, do you know what the 3 first words of the UN Charter are? We the peoples. It's not we the governments, it's we the peoples. If the starting point is the people's situation on the ground, why don't we more start to work from the village perspective, from possibly the region, and then prove that you can do work, especially since the public sector is so weak anyway in many countries, and to prove that we can do it locally. I have spent a lot of time on water in my life. I was starting Water Aid Sweden once upon a time and worked with the UN. And I took it on myself as to try to, instead of looking at the lack of water as a crisis signal, it should rather be a sign of wake-up call to cooperate. In Darfur, when I was special envoy in Darfur, the militia threw dead dogs in the wells, in the water wells, in order to chase the people to the huge internal IDP camps in Darfur. You've seen them. But what did they gain from that? Could they use these villages after they had destroyed the water? No. In other words, the best thing to do is to try, and that's why I like the Mali Cooperation World Food Programme, SIPRI, to see that we, in spite of this lack of interest sometimes from governments and from international actors, can create realities on the ground, both with the organizations, UN agencies, but also the civil society, organizations like yours and others, to focus on the problem in that particular area and then prove our point. So I think the challenge now is to use both food and water as reasons to find solutions, circular solutions, sharing solutions, multiplication factors, helping with the transports and so forth, so that you create a system on the ground. We need to have a movement from the people's perspective in order to prove that it can work. And this is important because it has to do with the credibility of United Nations, credibility of all of us. If we just see things going wrong, we need to have a new angle to deal with it. And I think the local grassroots perspective, helped by both national actors and international actors, is the way to go. And I hope it can be applied even with those other factors. But this is a mess with the terrorist activities, with the climate change elements, with all these factors that we all have identified. But still, you can't give up. You got to find one area where you can make a difference and then do that. Otherwise, we will fall into hopelessness. So I still think if we can prove the point from the local perspective, we can do great things.
No, let's not fall into hopelessness. But I see that the time is soon running out. So I would just like you to wrap up with giving one main message to this great audience before we will be finished for today. And I'll start with you, Sylvia.
Well, I mean, the message, I think, it's exactly that. The conflict is multiple causes. We have to address it in multiple sides. And in order to do that, I think it was advocated we need also the type of quality of partnership and resources that can support this, effort. So we are very thankful to Sweden for being the champion on good donorship, but we hope that the SIPRI report will also galvanize others to follow in that path. And when I say not only from the donorship part, but from the political engagement and the advocacy. So I think we need more of that, and I think the SIPRI report highlighted very much. And start from community. So it's maybe two messages, or replace the community at the center of the discourse, as Jan said.
Thank you. So over to Janine.
Very important messages, and I would like to say that cooperation is the key. And I'm also happy that we are discussing now from a broader perspective, that the conflict is not only the old-time security issues, but we are discussing it in a broader perspective, which is also a much better point from where we can actually go forward and have a better development in this area and other places.
And the last word, Jan.
Well, I subscribe to the other wise members of this panel. It's a wonderful gender equality panel, don't you think? Only 25% men. I like that.
One man too many.
That's good. My wife will like that. No, I think I always say the most important word in today's world, it's the word together. It's combining efforts. It's seeing the role of different actors and add to them, add national and international energy to a problem. And then I was thinking of one of my heroes is Alva Myrdal, who was the Swedish Minister of Disarmament. Claes Thorsson, my colleague from Foreign Ministry, knows very well. And she was by the first chair of SIPRI in the 60s, and now I am the chair a few years later. I helped her draft the bill as a young attaché. There was a young diplomat who was rather arrogant, and at a seminar he said to Alva Myrdal, "Isn't this rather unrealistic that you can expect total disarmament?" And he very snobbish. His career didn't go very well in the end. So Alva Myrdal answered, I have to say it in Swedish first. Det är ovärdigt att ge upp. It is not dignified to give up. And I think even Sylvia, under hard circumstances under which you work now and also have during your career, we must never give up. And we must also be good examples of showing that we can help and that we can make a difference and that all of you can make a difference.
Thank you. So a warm applause for the panel, but also for the SIPRI and the program teams. So thank you.
Thank you.